Case 1. Martin Luther King, Jr. April 4th, 1968. 6:01 p.m. The Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee becomes the scene of America's most devastating assassination. Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., the 39-year-old Baptist minister who had transformed the conscience of a nation, steps onto the second-floor balcony to breathe the evening air before dinner. One rifle shot from a boarding house window across the street, one bullet that tears through the right side of his jaw, travels down his spinal cord, and lodges in his shoulder. The man who preached that darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that, collapses in a pool of blood, his life ebbing away as stunned colleagues rush to his aid. Within hours, cities across America erupted in flames. The apostle of nonviolence had been silenced by violence itself, creating a devastating irony that would haunt the civil rights movement forever. James Earl Ray's single bullet didn't just kill a man. It shattered the dreams of millions who believed that love could conquer hate. But King was just the first name on a list of tragic deaths that would shake the faith of millions and prove that serving God often comes with the ultimate price. Welcome to Savage Case Files, where we investigate the darkest truths behind the headlines that change history. If you're drawn to true crime documentaries that expose the shocking realities most people never hear about, you need to subscribe to this channel right now. Case 2. Dietrich Bonhoeffer. April 9th, 1945. Flossenbürg concentration camp. At dawn, as Allied forces advanced toward Germany's crumbling heart, a 39-year-old Lutheran pastor walks naked to the gallows. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, one of Nazi Germany's most brilliant theologians, is about to pay the ultimate price for choosing resistance over silence. Bonhoeffer had everything to lose and nothing to gain. Born into privilege, educated at the world's finest universities, he could have sat out Hitler's war in academic comfort. Instead, he joined the Abwehr, German military intelligence, not to serve the Reich, but to destroy it from within, through Operation Valkyrie. The conspiracy to assassinate Adolf Hitler. For 2 years, this pastor-turned-spy gathered intelligence and coordinated with resistance fighters, all while maintaining his theological writings and underground seminary. His dual life as man of God and would-be assassin created an impossible moral tension that he resolved through a simple conclusion: sometimes, love requires violence against evil. SS guards strip him of his prison clothes. His final prayer echoes through the execution yard. The rope tightens. In 3 weeks, Allied forces will liberate Flossenbürg. But they arrive too late to save the pastor who dared to plot against the devil himself. Bonhoeffer's death became a rallying cry for Christian resistance movements worldwide, proving that martyrdom sometimes requires picking up a sword instead of turning the other cheek. Case 3. Jim Elliot. January 8, 1956. The Curare River in Ecuador's uncharted jungle becomes a killing field. 5 young American missionaries lie dead on a sandbar, their bodies pierced by 9-foot hardwood spears thrown by Wawarani warriors they had come to evangelize. Jim Elliot, just 28 years old, had led this mission with evangelical fervor that bordered on obsession. A star athlete turned theologian, he had abandoned promising careers to reach what he called the most savage tribe on earth. For months, the 5 men had dropped gifts from their small plane, establishing tentative contact with the Wawarani through friendly gestures and broken phrases. Operation Oka seemed successful. Initial face-to-face contact went smoothly. Wawarani visitors accepted gifts, shared food, even flew in their yellow Piper aircraft. But on January 8th, when the missionaries' scheduled radio contact failed, search planes found only bodies scattered across the beach and their plane destroyed. The Wawarani had used their traditional weapons with devastating efficiency. Each missionary had been speared multiple times, their evangelical dream ending in the very violence they had hoped to transform through Christian love. But this story didn't end with their deaths. In an astonishing turn of forgiveness that defied human logic, the widows would return to live among their husbands' killers, ultimately converting the very warriors who had destroyed their families. Case 4, Keith Green. July 28, 1982. A small Cessna 414 struggles to lift off from a private airstrip in Lindale, Texas. Overloaded with passengers and fuel, the aircraft climbs barely 300 feet before stalling, rolling inverted, and slamming into the ground in a fireball that kills all 12 people aboard. Among the dead, Keith Green, the 28-year-old musical prophet who had revolutionized Christian music with songs that cut like surgical knives through religious complacency. His two youngest children, Josiah and Bethany, ages 3 and 2, died alongside him. The plane Green had purchased just days earlier to expand his evangelistic outreach became their metal coffin. The National Transportation Safety Board's investigation revealed a catastrophic decision. The Cessna was loaded with 340 pounds beyond its maximum weight limit. Green, eager to transport his ministry team and family together, had ignored basic aviation safety protocols in his rush to serve God more efficiently. The irony cut deep. Green's songs had warned about the dangers of spiritual compromise, yet he had compromised flight safety in his zeal to spread the gospel. His widow Melody was left to raise their surviving daughter alone while processing the reality that her husband's impatience had killed their children. The crash silenced one of Christianity's most uncompromising voices at the peak of his influence, proving that even prophetic gifting couldn't overcome the laws of physics. Case 5, David Wilkerson. April 27, 2011. U.S. Highway 175 near Frankston, Texas, becomes a scene of twisted metal and shattered glass. David Wilkerson, the 79-year-old pastor who had transformed thousands of drug addicts through Teen Challenge, dies instantly when his Subaru Outback collides head-on with an 18-wheeler tractor-trailer. This was the man who had walked fearlessly into the most dangerous neighborhoods of New York City in 1958. Armed only with a Bible and an unshakable conviction that God could transform even the most hardened gang members. His ministry to Nicky Cruz and the Mau Maus had become legendary, spawning a global network of rehabilitation centers. Texas Department of Public Safety investigators determined that Wilkerson had crossed the center line for unknown reasons. No alcohol, no drugs, no mechanical failure, just a split-second deviation that sent his vehicle directly into the path of oncoming traffic. The truck driver, uninjured but traumatized, could only watch helplessly as the collision unfolded. The timing seemed particularly cruel. Wilkerson had spent his final years warning of coming judgment on America, writing urgent prophecies about economic collapse and spiritual darkness. His voice of warning was silenced just as he believed the nation needed it most. In one inexplicable moment, the highway claimed a prophet whose fearless street ministry had proven that no one was beyond redemption. Case 6. Aimee Semple McPherson. September 27, 1944. Room 316 of the Imperial Hotel in Oakland, California, becomes the scene of one of evangelism's most scandalous deaths. Aimee Semple McPherson, the 53-year-old founder of the Foursquare Church and America's first female megachurch pastor, is found unconscious with an empty bottle of barbiturate sleeping pills beside her bed. This was the woman who had revolutionized American Christianity through pure theatrical genius. Her elaborate stage productions featuring motorcycle rides, elaborate costumes, and Hollywood-quality drama had drawn millions to her Los Angeles temple. She had survived kidnapping scandals, divorce controversies, and constant criticism from male religious leaders who resented her success. The coroner's inquest revealed a lethal combination of seconal and kidney failure. But the circumstances raised disturbing questions. Why was she alone in that hotel room? Had the constant pressure of ministry leadership, financial scandals, and personal attacks finally broken the woman who seemed unbreakable? McPherson's death sparked immediate controversy. Supporters insisted it was a tragic accident, a woman taking prescribed medication who simply miscalculated the dosage. Critics whispered about suicide, suggesting that the queen of Christian theater had finally succumbed to despair behind her public facade. The mystery was never solved. America's most famous female evangelist died as dramatically as she had lived, leaving behind unanswered questions and a movement struggling to survive without its charismatic founder. Case 7. Ravi Zacharias. May 19, 2020. Ravi Zacharias, the 74-year-old Christian apologist who had defended faith in universities worldwide, dies of sarcoma at his Atlanta home. His death triggers an outpouring of grief from millions who had watched him demolish atheist arguments with intellectual precision and gentle grace. For decades, Zacharias had been Christianity's intellectual champion, the man who could stand before hostile academic audiences and make faith seem reasonable. His Ravi Zacharias International Ministries reached 70 countries, training apologists to defend Christianity against sophisticated secular attacks. But then came the horror that destroyed everything. 4 months after his death, an independent investigation by Miller and Martin law firm revealed the unthinkable. Zacharias had been a sexual predator who systematically abused vulnerable women for decades, using his spiritual authority to manipulate victims into silence. The evidence was overwhelming. Zacharias had targeted massage therapists and spa workers, many of them immigrants with limited English, using his fame and spiritual authority to coerce sexual compliance. He twisted scripture to justify his actions, telling victims that God had brought them together for special ministry. His death had saved him from public disgrace, but destroyed the faith of countless followers who realized their intellectual hero was a calculating sexual predator. RZIM collapsed. His books were pulled from stores, and his legacy became synonymous with religious hypocrisy. Case 8. Oscar Romero. March 24, 1980. The chapel of the Hospital of Divine Providence in San Salvador becomes a crime scene when a single rifle shot echoes through evening mass. Archbishop Oscar Romero collapses at the altar, blood spreading across his white vestments as he dies in the most sacred moment of Catholic worship. Romero had transformed from a conservative bishop into El Salvador's most dangerous voice for the poor. His weekly radio sermons reached hundreds of thousands, exposing government death squads and military atrocities with unflinching detail. The man once considered safe by the ruling elite had become their greatest enemy. As Romero raised the communion chalice, Major Roberto D'Abuison's assassin fired through the chapel's back window. The .22 caliber bullet struck the archbishop in the chest, exploding his heart and dropping him instantly. Panicked worshippers fled as their spiritual father died bleeding on the marble floor. D'Abuison, a military officer with CIA connections, had ordered the killing after Romero's sermon the day before, where he directly commanded soldiers to disobey orders to kill civilians. The message was clear. Even God's representatives weren't safe from government violence. Romero's funeral became another massacre, when snipers fired into the crowd of 250,000 mourners, proving that not even death could stop the cycle of violence he had died trying to break. Case 9. Janani Luwum. February 17, 1977. Archbishop Janani Luwum's official cause of death reads, car accident on Gulu Road. The reality: Uganda's Anglican leader was murdered on direct orders from dictator Idi Amin after daring to criticize the regime's systematic slaughter of innocent civilians. Luwum had watched in horror as Amin's 8-year reign of terror consumed Uganda like a cancer. Conservative estimates put the death toll at 300,000 civilians, tortured, murdered, and disappeared by Amin's security forces. The archbishop knew that speaking out meant certain death, but his conscience wouldn't allow silence. On February 16th, Amin summoned Luam and other church leaders to a meeting where he accused them of treason for protesting human rights abuses. Witnesses reported seeing the archbishop's vehicle being escorted by military vehicles toward his supposed release. Hours later, radio broadcasts announced his death in a tragic traffic accident. International observers who examined the wreckage found evidence of gunshots, not collision damage. Amin had ordered Luam's execution, then staged an elaborate cover-up to avoid international condemnation for murdering a respected religious leader. Luam's martyrdom became a rallying point for Ugandan resistance. His willingness to die rather than remain silent about genocide inspired a generation of African church leaders to choose prophetic courage over political survival, proving that some truths are worth dying for. Case 10. Graham Staines. January 23, 1999. The village of Manoharpur in eastern India becomes the scene of unthinkable horror. Australian missionary Graham Staines and his two young sons, Philip, 10, and Timothy, 6, are burned alive in their station wagon by a Hindu fundamentalist mob led by Bajrang Dal extremists. For 34 years, Staines had dedicated his life to treating leprosy patients whom Indian society had abandoned as untouchables. His medical mission had transformed thousands of lives, providing hope to people society considered cursed by the gods. His only crime was showing Christian compassion to India's most despised outcasts. The family had been sleeping in their vehicle after attending a jungle camp meeting when the mob surrounded them with torches and gasoline. Witnesses reported hearing the children's screams as flames engulfed the car, while their father tried desperately to protect them from the inferno. Dara Singh, the mob's leader, was arrested and convicted for orchestrating the murders. His motive was clear. Christian missionaries were converting too many low-caste Hindus by treating them with dignity and medical care that Hindu society denied them. In a display of grace that stunned the world, Staines' widow Gladys publicly forgave her family's killers and continued their medical mission, proving that even the most brutal religious violence couldn't extinguish the love that had motivated their service. Case 11. John Harper. April 15, 1912. The North Atlantic becomes a floating graveyard as RMS Titanic breaks apart and sinks into the frigid darkness. Among the 1,500 people who die in the freezing water is John Harper, a 39-year-old Scottish Baptist pastor who transforms his final moments into humanity's most extraordinary floating sermon. Harper was traveling to Chicago's Moody Church to begin a new ministry, accompanied by his 6-year-old daughter Annie and her aunt. When the unsinkable ship struck the iceberg at 11:40 p.m., Harper immediately began helping women and children into lifeboats, ensuring his daughter's safety before the ship's final plunge. As Titanic's stern rose vertically before the final dive, Harper stripped off his life jacket and gave it to another passenger, shouting, "You need this more than I do." Then he plunged into the 28-degree water that would kill most victims within 15 minutes. Multiple survivors reported hearing Harper's voice echoing across the water as he swam from person to person, asking, "Are you saved?" to anyone still conscious. When one young man replied, "No," Harper shouted back, "Believe in the Lord Jesus Christ and you will be saved," before the freezing Atlantic claimed his voice forever. Harper's body was never recovered, but his floating congregation remembered a pastor who chose to evangelize rather than panic, transforming history's most famous maritime disaster into an opportunity for eternal rescue. Case 12. William J. Seymour. September 28, 1922. William Joseph Seymour, the one-eyed African-American preacher who sparked the global Pentecostal movement, dies of a heart attack in Los Angeles, impoverished, largely forgotten, and buried in an unmarked grave, despite having launched a religious revolution that would reach 600 million believers worldwide. In 1906, Seymour's Azusa Street revival had shattered every social barrier in America. Black and white, rich and poor, educated and illiterate, worshipped together in defiance of Jim Crow's segregation. His tiny mission became the epicenter of supernatural phenomena that spread across 6 continents within a decade. But the very movement Seymour birthed eventually rejected him. White Pentecostal leaders gradually separated from his integrated model, creating denominations that excluded the black pastor who had given them their spiritual foundation. By 1915, Seymour's influence had been systematically erased from the movement he created. Seymour spent his final years pastoring a handful of faithful followers while watching his spiritual children prosper in segregated organizations that denied his contributions. The man who had broken down racial barriers died broken by the racism of his own spiritual descendants. History's greatest revival leader died in anonymity, his unmarked grave symbolizing how easily religious movements forget the very people who birthed them. Case 13. John Olin Chow. November 17, 2018. North Sentinel Island in the Indian Ocean becomes a killing ground when 26-year-old American missionary John Allen Chow is shot full of arrows by Sentinelese tribesmen, whose isolation he had illegally violated in his obsession to evangelize the world's last uncontacted people. Chow had spent years preparing for this moment, learning survival skills and studying missionary martyrs while posting inspirational content about reaching unreached peoples. His Instagram account revealed a young man consumed with romantic notions of sacrificial evangelism, viewing the Sentinelese as his personal evangelistic trophy. Despite Indian government prohibitions and international law protecting the tribe, Chow bribed local fishermen to transport him to the Forbidden Island. His first landing attempt, on November 15th, resulted in an arrow through his waterproof Bible. Undeterred, he returned 2 days later. Sentinelese warriors met Chow's second landing with a coordinated arrow barrage that killed him instantly. His body was dragged across the beach and buried in the sand by people defending their right to remain isolated from outside diseases and cultural contamination. Chow's death sparked global debate about missionary colonialism versus religious freedom, proving that modern martyrdom could be broadcast instantly through social media platforms that transformed naive idealism into viral inspiration for future illegal evangelism. Case 14. Cassie Bernal. April 20th, 1999. Columbine High School's library becomes a slaughterhouse when Dylan Klebold and Eric Harris execute their planned massacre. Among the 13 victims is 17-year-old Cassie Bernal, whose alleged final words would transform her into Christianity's most famous teenage martyr. Cassie had undergone a dramatic spiritual transformation from rebellious teenager to devoted Christian youth leader. Her parents credited faith with saving their daughter from destructive peer influences, never imagining that her newfound beliefs would make her a target for homicidal classmates. According to initial witness accounts, one gunman pointed his weapon at Cassie and asked, "Do you believe in God?" When she answered yes, he reportedly replied, "Why?" and shot her in the head before she could respond. The story electrified Christian communities worldwide. Later FBI investigations cast doubt on this narrative, suggesting the exchange may have occurred with another victim or been confused in the chaos. But the damage was done. Cassie had already become a symbol of teenage faith under fire. Regardless of factual accuracy, Cassie's story inspired millions of Christian teenagers to consider whether they would die for their beliefs. Her alleged martyrdom became more powerful than the truth, proving that religious narratives can transcend historical verification when they meet desperate spiritual needs. Case 15. Manchu Massimo. May 4, 1928. Marishane village in South Africa's Limpopo province becomes the scene of honor killing when 15-year-old Manche Masemola is beaten to death by her own parents for refusing to abandon her Christian conversion and return to traditional petty religious practices. Manche had secretly attended Anglican services despite her parents' fierce opposition to Christianity, which they viewed as a threat to their ancestral traditions and family honor. Her baptismal preparations represented ultimate betrayal in a culture where religious conversion meant rejecting one's entire heritage. When Manche's parents discovered her planned baptism, they demanded she renounce Christianity immediately. Her refusal triggered a violent family meeting where relatives took turns beating the teenager with sticks and stones until she died from her injuries, never wavering in her faith. Her parents buried Manche in an unmarked grave, hoping to hide their crime and prevent her from becoming a Christian martyr. For decades, the story remained hidden within the petty community as a warning against religious conversion. The Anglican Church eventually canonized Manche as a martyr, recognizing that her teenage faith had cost her everything. Her death became a powerful symbol of religious freedom in post-apartheid South Africa, proving that martyrdom could transcend cultural barriers through posthumous recognition. Case 16. Adrian Rogers. November 15, 2005. Adrian Rogers, the 74-year-old Southern Baptist giant who had led Memphis's Bellevue Baptist Church for 32 years, dies from complications of pneumonia and cancer, leaving behind a devastated congregation of 29,000 members who had never known church without his commanding presence. Rogers had transformed a struggling Baptist church into one of America's most influential congregations through his powerful preaching and unwavering biblical conservatism. His radio program, Love Worth Finding, reached millions weekly, making him the voice of traditional Southern Baptist theology. The double assault of lung cancer and pneumonia proved too much for Rogers' weakened immune system. His final months were spent battling infections that his cancer-compromised body couldn't overcome, despite the desperate prayers of thousands who believed God would heal their beloved pastor. Rogers' death sent shockwaves through the Southern Baptist Convention, which had relied on his theological leadership for decades. Bellevue Baptists struggled to maintain unity without the pastor, who had defined their identity, while conservative evangelicals mourned losing their most articulate defender. His passing left a theological void that no single leader could fill, fragmenting the conservative evangelical movement that Rogers had unified through his passionate biblical preaching and uncompromising doctrinal positions. Case 17. Henry Morrison. 1890s. The African wilderness claims another missionary when Henry Morrison, a devoted evangelist spreading Christianity across uncharted territories, becomes prey to a man-eating lion that stalks and kills him during a routine evangelistic journey through predator-infested lands. Morrison had spent years traversing dangerous African territories where European diseases and wild predators claimed most missionaries within months of arrival. His dedication to reaching unreached tribes had led him deep into regions where lions regularly hunted human prey. Traveling alone between villages, Morrison encountered a massive male lion that attacked with predatory precision. His companions found his torn remains days later, along with his blood-stained diary containing his final entry. "All is well. The Lord's will be done." Morrison's diary revealed a man who understood the risks but refused to abandon his calling. His last written words became legendary among missionary circles, demonstrating faith that remained unshaken even facing certain death. His death inspired thousands of replacement missionaries who viewed Morrison's lion attack as martyrdom rather than tragedy, His final diary entry became a rallying cry for Victorian-era evangelism, proving that some missionaries preferred death to abandoning their divine commission to spread Christianity across hostile continent. Case 18. Billy Graham. February 21, 2018. Billy Graham, the 99-year-old evangelist who had preached to more people than any human in history, dies peacefully at his North Carolina mountain home, triggering global mourning for the man who had become Christianity's most trusted voice for 7 decades. Graham had transformed from an unknown young preacher into the world's most famous evangelist, counseling presidents and preaching to over 200 million people across 6 continents. His integrity and moral authority had made him America's unofficial chaplain during the nation's most turbulent decades. Parkinson's disease and age had gradually silenced the voice that once filled stadiums, but Graham's death still felt like the end of an era. His passing marked the conclusion of mass evangelism's golden age, when single preachers could unite entire nations through simple gospel messages. Presidents, prime ministers, and millions of ordinary believers mourned Graham's death as the loss of moral certainty in an increasingly divided world. His funeral became a testimony to the power of consistent character and unwavering message. Unlike the tragic deaths of other pastors on this list, Graham's peaceful passing represented ministry completed rather than cut short, proving that some spiritual leaders are permitted to finish their race with dignity intact. Case 19. E.V. Hill. February 24, 2003. E.V. Hill, the 79-year-old pastor whose booming voice had thundered for justice from Los Angeles pulpits for 5 decades, collapses from a massive heart attack during a routine church meeting, dying instantly without warning or goodbye to the congregation he had shepherded through riots, racial tensions, and urban decay. Hill had built Mount Zion Missionary Baptist Church into a beacon of hope in south-central Los Angeles, standing courageously between police and rioters during the 1992 uprising while preaching racial reconciliation when hatred consumed the city. His church became neutral ground where enemies could find common purpose. The heart attack struck without warning during what seemed like an ordinary Tuesday evening. Hill's massive frame collapsed in the church hallway as stunned staff members watched their seemingly indestructible leader die before emergency responders could arrive. Hill's sudden death left a leadership vacuum in a community still struggling with poverty, gang violence, and racial tensions. His unique ability to bridge divides between black and white, rich and poor, had made him irreplaceable in Los Angeles's complex social landscape. His death silenced a powerful voice for urban ministry and social justice at a time when his community needed his leadership most, proving that even the strongest shepherds can be removed without notice. Case 20. Nicky Cruz. May 9, 2023. Nicky Cruz, the 85-year-old former gang leader whose miraculous conversion from violent criminal to evangelist had inspired millions worldwide, dies from stroke complications at a Colorado Springs hospital, marking the end of one of Christianity's most dramatic transformation stories. Cruz had been the most feared gang leader in New York City's mean streets during the 1950s, leading the notorious Mau Maus in brutal territorial wars that terrorized Brooklyn neighborhoods. His reputation for savage violence made him untouchable, until a young preacher named David Wilkerson dared to approach him with an impossible message of divine love. Wilkerson's persistent evangelism had penetrated Cruz's hardened heart, producing one of history's most unlikely conversions. The man who had once stabbed rivals without remorse became a gentle evangelist who spent 6 decades reaching gang members that society had written off as irredeemable. The stroke that claimed Cruz represented his final battle after a lifetime of warfare, first against society, then against the darkness he had escaped. His death was peaceful, surrounded by family members who had witnessed his complete character transformation. Cruz's death closed the book on urban ministry's most famous success story, proving that no one is beyond the reach of transformative grace, regardless of their violent past or criminal history. 20 spiritual leaders. 20 tragic endings. The patterns are unmistakable. Assassination claimed those who challenged political power. King, Romero, and Luam died because their faith demanded justice over silence. Missionary martyrdom struck those who ventured into hostile territories. Eliot, Staines, and Shaw paid with their lives for crossing cultural boundaries. Medical tragedy claimed others, Zacharias, Rogers, and Hill, proving that even the most faithful aren't immune to human mortality. These deaths expose Christianity's central paradox. Those who claim divine protection often face the most dangerous circumstances. Their faith didn't shield them from bullets, diseases, or accidents. It drove them toward the very dangers that killed them. Service to God became service to death itself. But here's the question that haunts every believer. If God doesn't protect his most devoted servants from tragic death, what does that mean for ordinary faith? Do these deaths prove divine abandonment? Or do they demonstrate that some causes are worth dying for, regardless of divine protection? Have you struggled with faith after watching religious leaders suffer tragic deaths? What would you tell someone whose pastor died unexpectedly, leaving their congregation devastated and questioning God's protection? How do you reconcile belief in divine care with the reality that faithful people often face the most brutal endings? Share your thoughts about faith and tragedy in the comments below. Finally, subscribe to Savage Case Files for more investigations that challenge everything you thought you knew.